I sat at the head of the long wooden table. 75 candles flickered in the silence, but the room was empty. No hugs, no laughter. No one had remembered. That was the moment I realized something. I had spent my life giving everything. But had I ever truly been seen? You see, I owned something they all want, a secret I kept quiet until I felt forgotten. That day, I decided not to say a word. Not yet. Not until I remembered who I was. So before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe, because tomorrow I have saved something truly special just for you. My name is Evelyn Carter. I live in a quiet town by the sea. Every morning I wake up at 6 o'clock. I open my curtains slowly and watch the light touch the waves. There is something peaceful about watching the ocean first thing in the morning. It reminds me that no matter how old I become, life still moves. I make my tea, black, no sugar, just the way I like it. Then I sit in my old armchair by the window. That chair has been with me for over 40 years. My late husband, Thomas, gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. He said it was strong, just like me. He passed away 15 years ago, but I still talk to him sometimes. My days are simple now. I read books, water my plants, and sometimes bake too much banana bread. The neighbors love it, especially young Ellie across the street. She says it tastes like childhood. On Wednesdays, I go to the community center for knitting club. The other ladies there talk about their children and grandchildren. We laugh, we gossip, and we trade scarf patterns. They call me the elegant one. I do not know why, maybe because I always wear my pearls. I have 3 children. Michael, my eldest, is a lawyer. Susan is a nurse, and the youngest, David, is in business. They all live in different cities now. Busy lives, busy families. They say they will visit more often, but time moves fast. I do not mind. Not really. They send messages now and then, and on birthdays or holidays they send flowers or cards. I always smile when I open the envelopes. I try not to expect too much. After all, they have their own lives. I raise them to be independent, to chase their dreams. That is what a mother is supposed to do, is it not? Still, sometimes the house feels too quiet. Sometimes I hold my tea a little longer than I should. And I wonder, do they ever sit and think of me? My 75th birthday is next month. I have not made any plans. Last year, they sent a group message. "Happy birthday, Mom," with some emojis and a picture of a cake. I smiled. I thanked them. But the house was silent then, too. And the candles, I lit them myself. This year, I told myself not to think too much about it. I have everything I need. A roof, my books, my memories, my little garden with the roses Thomas planted. But something inside me feels expectant, as if this birthday might be different, as if they might surprise me. I do not want to hope too much. Hope can be heavy, but still, I hope. It started with a phone call, just a short one. My daughter Susan called me one evening while I was folding laundry. She asked, "How are you, Mom?" I smiled. Her voice always brings me warmth. I told her I was doing well. I told her about the roses in the garden and the new book I had started. She laughed politely, but did not really respond. Then she said, "I might not be able to come by for your birthday this year. Work is crazy." Her voice was too quick, too practiced, like it had been rehearsed. I said it was all right. I always say that. But the silence after my words felt longer than usual. She said, "Anyway, maybe we can do something next month." I said, "Of course, dear. Next month is fine." She said goodbye quickly, and the line went dead. I stood there, holding a towel, wondering why I felt cold all of a sudden. I folded it twice, neatly, and placed it in the drawer. That weekend, I called Michael. He answered after a few rings and said he was on the way to a meeting. He sounded distracted. I asked how the children were, and he said they were growing fast. Then he paused. "Oh, and about your birthday, Mom? I know it is coming up. We might just send something over. We are still sorting out our calendar." Again I smiled. I always do. I said, "That is fine, Michael. I understand." But inside me, something tugged at my chest. I wanted to ask, "Will you come?" But I swallowed the words like bitter tea. The next day, I received a message from David. It was short. "Hey, Mom. Happy early birthday in case I forget next week. Love you." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. The message felt more like a reminder than a celebration. I went to the kitchen and stared at the old recipe book Thomas and I used to cook from. I thought maybe I would make a chocolate cake anyway. I always make one for my birthday, just in case someone comes by. Just in case. Later that evening, I walked to the living room and sat in my chair, the one that faces the sea. I watched the waves crash gently against the shore, and I whispered to Thomas, "Do they remember who I am?" I did not feel angry. Not yet. But I felt something else. Something strange. Something I could not name. The knitting club felt different too. I told the ladies I might host a small tea for my birthday. One of them asked, "Will your children be there?" I said, "No, probably not." She gave me a sad little smile and touched my hand. Something inside me stirred. Something I did not know was waiting. And as I walked home that afternoon, I looked at my reflection in the bakery window. My coat was buttoned, my hair neat, my pearls shining softly in the light. But I did not recognize the eyes looking back at me. I could feel something changing. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The house was silent. Even the sea outside seemed still, as if it too was holding its breath. I pulled the blanket higher, trying to feel warm. But my thoughts would not let me rest. Why did I feel like this? It was not the first time they had missed a birthday. It was not the first time they had sent messages instead of making time. So why did this time feel different? I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The moon was high, silver and distant. I watched the light dance across the table. My hands felt cold. I started thinking about the times when they were small. Michael used to climb into my lap and tell me he would never leave me. Susan would bring me wildflowers from the garden and say, "You are my best friend, Mommy." David would draw pictures of our family and always make my dress the brightest color. I remembered birthday mornings when they would jump into my bed and sing off-key. The cards made with crayons, the cakes with too much icing, the laughter, the joy, the love. And now everything felt distant. Not just miles, but hearts. I told myself it was normal. Children grow. Life moves. But something inside me whispered, is this what it is supposed to feel like? At knitting club the next day, I could not concentrate. My hands kept slipping. The yarn tangled. The pattern lost. Are you all right, Evelyn? One of the ladies asked. I smiled too quickly. Yes, just tired. But even my smile felt strange on my face. I walked home slowly. My legs felt heavier than usual. Not from age, but from something else. From questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I raise them to be too independent? Did I make them believe I did not need them? Or did they simply forget how to see me? I sat by the sea again, letting the wind touch my face. The water always made me feel grounded, but today, it did not help. I watched two young children playing by the edge, their mother chasing after them, laughing. She looked tired, but she looked full of love, of purpose, of being needed. I felt like a page from an old book, still here, but no longer being read. I walked home and opened my drawer. Inside, there were birthday cards from years past. Some had handwriting, others were printed. None from last year. I stared at the empty space. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Then I saw it. The old envelope Thomas had written in his last year. To my darling Evelyn, for your 75th. I had never opened it. I had saved it, waiting for the right moment. I placed it back gently. Not yet. Not today. I needed to understand what I was feeling. I needed to find my center again. But all I felt was confusion, like I was slowly becoming invisible in the very life I had built. A few days later, my neighbor's daughter Lily stopped by. She is 27, kind-hearted, and always brings a burst of energy when she visits. She often helps me carry groceries or asks about my roses. But that day, she brought something more. Her presence felt like sunlight. Miss Evelyn, she said, stepping into my living room. I brought you something. It was a small lemon cake, still warm. I know your birthday is coming. I wanted to make sure someone gave you cake. Her words made my throat tighten. I thanked her and made us tea. We sat across from each other, the lemon cake between us, steam rising from our cups. She asked me how I was doing, and for the first time in a long while I did not lie. I feel forgotten, I said softly. She looked at me with such kindness that I nearly cried. She reached across the table and touched my hand. You are not forgotten, Evelyn. You are just not loud enough for this world anymore. But you are not invisible. Something in me cracked gently, like old ice. I took a deep breath. We talked for over an hour. I told her about my children, about how they were all too busy to come for my birthday, about the quiet that had started to feel heavy. She listened, not just with her ears, but with her whole heart. Then she said something I had not expected. Maybe they think you are too strong to need them. Maybe they believe you never break. Her words stayed in the air like perfume. After she left, I sat on the couch holding the teacup she had used. I could still feel her warmth there. Something about our conversation stirred a memory of who I used to be. Not just a mother or a wife, but Evelyn. A woman who felt deeply and loved fully. I wanted to trust her words. I wanted to believe that I still mattered. That night I called Susan again. She picked up after a few rings. I tried to sound light. I told her about Lily, about the lemon cake, about the tea. Susan laughed and said, "That is sweet of her." Then I said something I had not planned to say. "I miss you, Susan." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "I miss you too, Mom. I really do. Life has just been a lot." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that she meant it. So I said, "It is all right. I just wanted to hear your voice." And she replied, "I will try to visit soon. I promise." I held on to that word, promise, like it was a thread in a storm. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not for makeup, not for vanity, but to see if I still looked like someone worth showing up for. My reflection was tired, but my eyes held a small spark, like a single candle in a dark room. I wanted to trust again, not just in my children, but in myself, in the idea that maybe I had not been forgotten completely. Maybe I just needed to be seen again. The next morning, I went to the local market to buy some fresh apples. I needed something simple to do, something to feel normal. The air was crisp, and the sky was soft with clouds. As I walked past the bakery, I saw an old friend I had not spoken to in months. Her name was June. She and I used to take walks together after our husbands passed. But time, as it often does, pulled us in different directions. "Evelyn," she said, surprised. I smiled and opened my arms. We hugged, and I felt a quiet comfort in her presence. We walked together for a while. She asked how I had been. I told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. She looked at me carefully and said, "You look tired. Is everything all right at home?" I hesitated. Then I said, "I think they have forgotten me, June. My birthday is coming and none of the children are coming. They all have excuses. Work, life, busy schedules." June's eyes softened, but her voice was steady. "Evelyn, I am going to say something that may sting." I nodded. I trusted her honesty. She continued, "Sometimes when people know you, are kind and forgiving, they stop trying. Not because they do not love you, but because they believe you will always be there. They think you will never stop giving." I stayed quiet. Then she said, "But if you keep giving from an empty place, you will disappear. Not just from their lives, but from your own." Her words echoed in me. Disappear. She looked out at the sea and added, "Do not let them forget who you are, even if it means reminding them in a way they do not expect." We parted with another hug. I walked home slowly, carrying June's words like heavy stones in my pocket. That evening, I sat by the window with a journal I had not touched in years. I began to write, not poetry, not letters, just thoughts. I wrote, "When did I stop being a person and start being only a role? Would they miss me, or just the idea of me? If I disappeared tomorrow, would they rearrange their schedules then?" Each sentence felt like a drop in a quiet lake. No splash, just ripples. I made myself a cup of tea. I lit a candle. And I thought about what June had said. Not let them forget who I am. But who was I now? I heard the wind brushing the windows. The silence was deep, but not empty. I remembered a phrase Thomas used to say, Even the strongest trees need roots to drink from, and I began to wonder, had I become too quiet, too understanding, too invisible? That night, I dreamed I was walking through a house with many doors. Each one had a name: wife, mother, grandmother, friend. But one door had no name. It was closed, and I could not open it. When I woke up, I knew what it meant. There was a part of me I had forgotten too. And now I had been warned. For the next few days, I tried to push the feelings away. I told myself June was being dramatic. I told myself that my children loved me in their own way, that I was overthinking, overreacting, that this was all just part of getting older. I cleaned the house with more energy than usual. I dusted shelves that did not need dusting. I rearranged the pantry. I baked shortbread cookies and gave them to neighbors. I told myself I was simply staying busy. But even with every chore completed, something in my heart remained undone. I smiled at people in town. I laughed when the mailman asked how I was. I even went to church that Sunday and sang louder than I had in months. But inside, I felt like I was walking through fog. Susan sent a message, just a quick one. She wrote, "Hope you are well, Mom. We have dance recitals this weekend. The twins are excited." I typed a reply. I erased it. I typed it again. Then I finally wrote, "That sounds lovely. I would love to see a photo." She replied with a smiley face and said, "I will try. Try." That word again. So small, so casual, like a thread that could snap at any time. Michael called briefly to say he might be out of town for work the week of my birthday. I said, "Oh, I understand." He said, "You are always so good about things, Mom." And that was the problem. I was always good about things. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, the silence pressing against my ears. I stared at the phone, wondering what would happen if I simply stopped calling. Would they notice? I made a pot of soup that night, even though I was not hungry. Cooking had always comforted me. The soft sound of boiling water, the scent of rosemary. It reminded me of simpler times, of when the kitchen was full of life. I tried to focus on that. I tried not to think about how quiet the house felt. I tried not to hear June's voice in my head, warning me about giving too much. I tried not to open that old envelope from Thomas, even lit a fire in the fireplace, though the weather did not really call for it. It crackled softly as I sat nearby with a book I did not read. I tried to pretend I was content. But even the warmest fire cannot fill a cold heart. As I stared into the flames, I whispered aloud, "I am fine. I am fine. I am fine." Saying it 3 times did not make it true, but I hoped the fire would believe me at least. A few mornings later, I stood in my garden trimming the lavender bush. The air smelled fresh, and the bees were busy, unaware of my thoughts. Lily came by again. She was wearing a soft blue sweater and holding a paper bag. "Fresh bread," she said, lifting it with a smile. "It just came out of the oven at my friend's bakery. Thought you might enjoy it with your tea." I thanked her and invited her in. We sat in the sunroom where the morning light spilled through the windows. The bread was warm. The butter melted easily. It was one of those small moments that should have felt joyful. But I kept thinking about the way Lily looked at me. It was not pity. It was not just kindness either. It was something deeper, a kind of watching, as if she was searching for someone beneath my polite words. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they are not convinced. I think you are very good at pretending, she said softly. I looked at her, surprised. She continued, You smile. You ask questions. You pour tea just right. But your eyes look like they are waiting for something that never comes. I blinked. No one had ever said that to me before. I know that look, she said. My mother had it after my grandmother passed. She still cooked, still hosted. But there was something missing in her eyes. I looked down at the table. I wanted to hide, not from Lily, but from the truth her words uncovered. I said, Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared, how long it would take for someone to notice. Lily reached for my hand again. She did not speak. She just held it gently, like something fragile. That moment, so still, so quiet, made me want to cry. But I did not. Instead, I asked her about her life, about her job, about her dreams. She answered, but her eyes kept returning to mine. Not with judgment, with concern, with recognition. It made me think of how others had been looking at me too. Susan, during our last video call, had her smile looked forced? Michael, when he called, had his voice held guilt instead of warmth? Maybe I had become a mirror to them, something they looked into and quickly looked away from. After Lily left, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. I stared at myself. I did not look old exactly, but I did look faded, like a painting left in the sun. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about the way people see us. Not just what we say, but what we carry behind our eyes. I thought of Lily's gaze, gentle, but honest. And I wondered, when had I stopped looking at myself that way? 2 days passed. The sky stayed gray, and the wind felt colder than usual. I sat on the porch with my shawl around my shoulders, holding a cup of lukewarm tea. I had been thinking about Michael, my oldest, the one who used to bring me daisies from the yard when he was 7, the one who used to ask me to stay just a few more minutes by his bed when he could not sleep. Now he was a man, a father, a restaurant owner, a man who always said he was busy. I picked up the phone. My hand hovered over his name. I stared at it for a long time. Then I pressed call. He answered after 3 rings. Hey, Mom, everything all right? His voice was casual. It always was. That made it harder. Michael, I said. Do you have a moment to talk? Really talk? There was a pause. Yeah, sure. What is going on? I took a deep breath. The kind that feels heavy in the chest. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Okay, he said slowly. Go ahead. I swallowed. Did you all forget my birthday? Another pause. Longer this time, too long. I mean, we did not forget, Mom, he said. Things have been complicated. Work has been... I interrupted him. My voice was calm, but my heart was loud. I did not ask if work was complicated. I asked if you forgot. He sighed. Honestly? Yes. I remembered 2 days after. Susan sent a message, and I realized I had missed it. I felt terrible. I stayed quiet. Then I asked, "Why did no one say anything afterward?" "I do not know. I think we all felt bad and embarrassed. Maybe we thought you were used to it by now." Used to it. I closed my eyes. He continued, "It is not that we do not care. We know you are strong. You always make things okay." I said nothing for a moment. Then I asked the harder question. "Do you still see me as your mother? Or am I just someone in the background now? Someone safe to forget?" He did not speak. I heard his breath, shaky and unsure. Finally he said, "I never meant to make you feel that way." "But you did," I replied gently. He whispered, I'm sorry," and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. But I also realized something important. His sorry would not undo the silence. His guilt would not light the candles that were never lit. His busy life would not bring back the time that had passed. The call ended quietly. I placed the phone on the table, and I sat there, not angry, not sad, just clear. The truth was not loud. It did not shout. It whispered, and it whispered this: they had not stopped loving me, but they had stopped seeing me. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed with the covers pulled up to my chest, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, except for the soft light from the hallway that slipped in through the crack in the door. It used to comfort me. Now, it only made the silence louder. I turned onto my side, then onto my back. I tried to think about happy things: family picnics, Jacob's first steps, Michael's high school graduation. But every sweet memory had a bitter aftertaste, because I could not stop wondering how we had drifted so far apart. My thoughts moved like a slow storm. They circled around the same questions. Why did they forget? Why did no one call the next day? Why did it take me asking for them to apologize? I sat up and reached for the photo album on my nightstand. It was old and worn at the edges. The cover had a faded picture of the family at the beach, sand between our toes, wind in our hair. I opened it slowly. Page by page, I traced my fingers over the faces. Smiles that once seemed so real, eyes that sparkled with trust. Michael's graduation photo, Susan's wedding, Jacob as a toddler, holding a spoonful of mashed potatoes like it was treasure, whispered aloud. Where did we lose each other? Tears gathered quietly in my eyes, and I let them fall. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge, but because forgetting someone's birthday might seem small to others. Yet to me, it felt like being erased. I walked to the kitchen, barefoot. The tile was cold. I poured a glass of water and stood by the sink, looking out the window into the backyard. The moonlight touched the roses. Even they looked tired. I thought about calling June, but it was too late. I thought about writing a letter, but I had no idea what I would say. Instead, I just stood there, listening to the stillness, and I let the silence answer me. It said, "You have been everything for them. But now it is time to be something for yourself." And still, I could not stop thinking. About the years I gave, about the meals I cooked, the stories I listened to, the birthdays I never forgot. I thought about what I had asked Michael. Do you still see me? And I realized Maybe the better question was, do I still see myself? The morning was colder than I expected, with a thin mist hanging in the air. I stood at the window, watching the fog cling to the trees like a secret, unsure of whether it wanted to stay or leave. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and took a deep breath. But the weight in my chest did not lift. It had been days since Michael's call, and I had done my best to put on a brave face. I had gone to the grocery store, watered the garden, even chatted with Mrs. Henderson next door about the weather. But inside, I felt like a quiet ache was growing, spreading into every corner of my body. It was not sharp pain. It was not the kind of hurt that knocks you down. It was a slow, creeping emptiness, the kind that settles in after you have been ignored for too long. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands resting on the cool surface. The morning sun had not quite reached the window, and the kitchen felt cold and still. I thought about the birthday I had spent alone, the phone calls that never came, the plans that were never made. How long had it been since I had really felt seen? The kettle began to whistle, breaking the silence. I poured hot water into my teacup, the steam rising in the still air, but even the warmth of the tea could not erase the emptiness inside. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the smell of chamomile fill the room. I wished I could find peace in this quiet. But the longer I sat, the more I realized how little peace there was. The truth was simple, though painful. They had forgotten me, and I had let them. I had allowed myself to become the background in my own life, the one who was always strong, always reliable, always forgiving. But who had I been forgiving? And why had I forgiven them so easily? My thoughts drifted to the times when I had been younger, when my life had felt full of possibilities. I remembered when Michael was a little boy, running around the yard with his friends. I remembered how I had always been the one to make things better for him, to help him through his struggles. But now, as an adult, he had stopped asking for my help. Now, he barely seemed to need me at all. I put my cup down gently on the table and looked at the empty chair across from me. The pain was quiet, but it was there. Not loud, not angry. Just a quiet, constant reminder that I had given so much and had received so little in return. I took another deep breath and stood up. I had things to do. I had always had things to do. But for the first time in a long while, I asked myself, what about me? What do I need? I spent the next few days thinking, as I always did. But this time there was a different weight to my thoughts. It was no longer just about the birthday. It was about something deeper. Something I had pushed aside for years. The quiet pain in my chest had become a constant hum, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had allowed my family to take. Not just my time, my energy, my love, but also my voice. I was not asking for grand gestures or even apologies. I was asking for recognition, for the simplest truth, that I mattered. And it was not too much to ask. I had been a mother. I had been a wife. I had been a daughter, a sister, a friend. I had been everything they needed, and I had always given my all. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. That afternoon, I called Michael again. This time, I did not wait for him to call me. I was not going to wait anymore. He answered quickly. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice steady. And I need you to be honest with me. No excuses, no, I was busy. There was a long pause before he answered. Okay, go ahead. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I felt the weight of everything I had been carrying for so long. The time had come. Michael, do you see me? Really see me? I heard his breath catch. He did not answer right away. But I did not let him off the hook. I have spent my life making sure everyone else was okay, making sure you were happy. But I need to know, do I still matter to you? Or am I just a name on a family tree? The silence stretched between us. I could feel him on the other end, probably shocked by my directness, but I was not going to soften it. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet. I do not know what to say, Mom. I never meant for you to feel this way. I took a deep breath. It was not about what he said. It was about what I needed to hear from him. I need to hear that you see me, I said softly. Not as your mother, not as the one who always takes care of things, but as Helen, as a person. I need you to see me. Another long pause. Then he spoke again, this time with a gentleness I had not heard before. I see you, Mom. I see you, and I am sorry I never said it before. It was not everything I had hoped for, but it was something. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside of me. Not a complete healing, not a perfect resolution, but a small step. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen me, and I had asked for it, and that was a beginning. The days that followed were quiet, almost peaceful in a way. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic changes, but something in me had shifted. Something inside me had been stirred that I had almost forgotten existed. I could not explain it clearly, but I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted, even if only a little. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe deeply without the tightness in my chest. But still, I did not have all the answers. I could not ignore the question that lingered in the back of my mind. Why did it take so long for me to ask for what I needed? I had spent so many years giving love, giving attention, giving advice. I had made sure everyone else was okay. But when had I ever asked for what I needed? When had I ever said, I need to be seen? When had I ever asked, do you care enough to notice me? It was strange, really. For so long, I had been the one who held everything together. The one who made sure the family gathered on holidays, who made the calls, who sent the cards. I had become so used to being the doer in the family, the one who took care of everything, that I had forgotten how to ask for care in return. But now, in this quiet moment of understanding, I realized something important. I had never been asking for the wrong thing. I had simply been asking in the wrong way. I had assumed that if I just kept giving, if I just kept loving, they would know how much I needed them. But the truth was, they had been waiting for me to ask. Not for their time, not for their attention, but for their love, for their acknowledgement, for their recognition of me as Helen, a person in her own right. It was not enough to just be their mother or their grandmother. I had to be me, someone who deserved the same respect and care that I had so freely given them for years. And I finally understood something else. They had not forgotten me. They had simply forgotten to see me. And now I had to make sure they never forgot again. The truth had settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and unshakable. I had spent so many years living for everyone else, giving them pieces of myself until there was nothing left to give. And yet, they had forgotten. I had been invisible to them, a shadow on the edges of their busy lives. But now, I could see clearly. I could see that it was time for me to stop waiting. It was time to stop hoping they would change. It was time to stop asking for something I should have been giving to myself all along. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number, my hand shaking slightly as I pressed the buttons. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded unsure. "Mom, is everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said. My voice was calm, but there was a firmness in it that I had never used with him before. "I need you to listen carefully." There was a pause, and I could hear him shift on the other end. I took a deep breath. "I have spent years giving and giving, Michael. Years of love, of time, of everything I had. But you have never asked me what I need. You have never truly seen me, and I cannot keep pretending that I am okay with that." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, could hear him trying to find the right words, but I was done waiting for the right words. "I love you," I said, my voice steady, "but I cannot keep giving myself away to people who do not even see me. I need to walk away for a while. I need to find myself again." I heard his voice falter. "Mom, wait." But I was already walking away from the phone, from the conversation, from the past. I did not know what would come next. I did not know if Michael would understand, or if I would ever see things the same way again. But I knew one thing for sure. I was walking away from me. I walked out into the yard, my feet cool. Against the grass, the air was fresh, and I could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the trees. I stood there, breathing in deeply, letting the world around me fill me up. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the expectations. Free from the weight of being everything to everyone. Free to just be me. And in that quiet moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never allow myself to be invisible again. I had walked away, but the pain did not leave. It lingered, curling around my heart like a shadow, refusing to disappear. The weight of it was different now, though. It was not the sharp, suffocating hurt I had felt before. It was a quiet ache, a reminder of what I had lost, what I had chosen to leave behind. In the days that followed, I kept busy. There were errands to run, chores to do, small tasks that filled the empty space in my home. But no matter how much I kept my hands moving, my mind would always wander back to that conversation with Michael, to the silence between us, to the things I had said, to the things I had not said. I did not regret speaking my truth. I had done what I needed to do. But the silence that followed was louder than any words, and it felt like it would echo in my life for a long time. At night, I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, the quiet stretching around me like a vast empty space. I would think about my family, my son, my daughter, my grandchildren, and wonder where I had gone wrong. Had I really done enough? Had I really shown them how much I loved them? Had I been too much for them, or not enough? The pain stayed, like a distant hum that never quite faded. But something had shifted in me too. For the first time, I was not waiting for anyone else to make things right. I was not looking for anyone to fix me, or to tell me that everything would be okay. I was standing on my own, learning how to carry my own pain. It was not easy. It was not simple, but it was mine to carry. And for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to do so. I spent days in quiet reflection, thinking about everything that had led me here, the choices I had made, the sacrifices I had given, the people I had loved, and I realized something important. The pain would always be a part of me, but it did not define me. I was not the sum of my hurts, my disappointments, or my broken relationships. I was Helen, a woman who had lived a full life, who had loved deeply and been loved in return, who had made mistakes and learned from them. I could carry the pain, but it would not carry me. Some days, the silence was too much to bear. The house felt too big, too empty, even though I had lived here for years. I would sit in my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the garden, and my thoughts would drift back to the past, to the days when my house was filled with laughter, with the sound of my children's voices, with the busy energy of family gatherings. Back then, everything had felt so full, so alive. I remembered the smell of my kitchen, the warmth of the oven baking cookies, or roasting a Sunday roast. I remembered the sound of my children's footsteps running through the halls, their chatter filling every corner of the house. I remembered the long talks with my husband late at night, the quiet moments when we would just sit together, not needing to speak, but knowing we were there for each other. I missed those days. I missed the way things had felt so easy back then, before the weight of responsibilities had turned into burdens, before the children had grown up and moved away, before the years had turned into a blur of work, family obligations, and unspoken emotions. I thought about Michael when he was younger, when he was full of dreams and laughter, so eager to make his mark on the world. And I remembered how I had always been there for him no matter what. I had been his biggest supporter, his greatest champion. I had given him everything I had. But now, it felt like the distance between us had grown too wide to bridge. And then, there were the memories of his father, my husband, the man I had spent so many years building a life with. It had been a life full of love, struggles, triumphs, and quiet moments of understanding. But even he had become a distant memory, as time had worn away at our connection. There was no denying the passage of time. There was no stopping it. Sometimes when I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all, the ache in my heart would become unbearable. I missed the past, not because I wanted to go back, but because it had been a time when everything felt simpler, when I had a role, when I was needed, when I was seen. But the past was gone, and the present was what I had to face now. The challenge was learning to live in this new reality, a reality where my children were grown and living their own lives, a reality where my relationships were different, quieter, more complicated. But it was also a reality where I was learning to live for myself, a reality where I was no longer defined by what I had given to others, but by what I was willing to give to myself. I had lost parts of my past, but I was beginning to find new pieces of myself, and maybe that was the most important thing of all. I did not know how long I could carry this weight alone. There were times when the silence seemed to grow too heavy, when the memories of what had been and the reality of what was now felt too much to bear. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. And so, I called Janet. Janet had been my friend for over 20 years. We had met through a mutual love of gardening, of all things, and had quickly become inseparable. She had been there for me through the ups and downs of life, through the birth of my children, through the passing of my husband, and through every challenge and triumph in between. She had seen the real me, the part of me I could not always show the world. When she picked up the phone, her voice was a welcome sound in the quiet of my house. "Helen?" she said, her voice warm and full of concern. "I have not heard from you in a while. Is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment. I had not told Janet about everything that had happened with Michael. I had not shared the weight of what I had been carrying. But in that moment, I knew that I needed to. "Janet, I have been struggling," I said quietly. "I feel like I am losing everything. My family, my place in this world. I am invisible to them, Janet. They do not see me." I could hear the soft rustle of papers on the other end of the line. She was pausing, gathering her thoughts. "I know you, Helen," she said softly. "I know you have been there for everyone else. But when was the last time you were there for yourself? When was the last time you asked for what you need?" Her words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had never thought about it that way. I had always given, always done, always been there for everyone else. But had I ever asked for help? Had I ever asked for someone to see me? "I have been so busy giving, Janet," I whispered. "I do not know what it feels like to ask for what I need." Janet was silent for a long moment, and then she spoke again, her voice full of compassion. "It is okay to ask for what you need, Helen. It is okay to be seen. You have spent your life giving, but it is time for you to receive too. You deserve to be loved, to be cared for. You deserve to be seen for who you truly are." Her words washed over me like a wave, and I felt something deep inside me begin to shift. For the first time in a long while, I felt heard. Not by my family, not by the world, but by Janet. She saw me for who I was, someone who had spent so much time giving, but who had forgotten how to ask for love in return. "You are not invisible, Helen," Janet said gently. "You are strong. You are worthy of love, and it is time for you to remember that." I sat in silence for a while after we hung up, letting her words sink into me. I had spent so many years believing I had to be everything for everyone, but I was finally starting to understand that it was okay to let go. It was okay to ask for what I needed. It was okay to be vulnerable. I was not alone. I had Janet, and I had myself. It was time to let go. The thought had been lingering in my mind for days now, growing stronger with each passing moment. I had spent so long holding on to things, relationships, memories, dreams, that I had forgotten how to let go. Letting go was a foreign concept to me. It felt like a loss. But now, as the weight of everything that had happened settled over me, I realized that sometimes letting go was the only way to move forward. It was not easy. Saying goodbye never was. But I had to do it. I stood in front of the window, looking out at the garden I had tended to for years, the flowers I had planted, the paths I had carefully laid out, the trees that had grown tall and strong, these had all been a part of my life. They had been my way of creating something beautiful, something lasting, something to hold on to. But even the garden needed to be tended to, needed to be refreshed. And so did I. I had already begun the process of letting go in small ways. I had moved things around in the house, cleared out old items that no longer served me. I had started to make space, not just physically, but emotionally. I had begun to let go of the resentment, the anger, the hurt that I had been carrying for so long. But now, it was time to let go of something bigger. I thought about Michael, about the silence that still hung between us. I had tried. I really had. I had reached out to him, spoken my truth, and yet the gap between us seemed to widen with every passing day. I had tried to hold on to the hope that things would change, that we would find our way back to each other. But I had to face the truth. Some things could not be fixed, not without both sides being willing to try. And Michael had not yet found the strength to meet me where I was. So, I made the decision. It was time to say goodbye. It was not a dramatic farewell. There were no angry words or bitter accusations. It was simply a quiet acknowledgement that we were not the same people we had once been. We had both changed. And sometimes, change meant that things could no longer stay the same. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. It was not a long letter, but it was honest. I told him that I loved him, but that I could no longer hold on to something that was no longer healthy for either of us. I told him that I was letting go, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed to find peace. I needed to find myself again. When I finished writing, I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. I did not know if I would ever send it, or if I would leave it for him to find when he was ready. But the act of writing it, of putting my thoughts down on paper, made me feel a sense of relief. It was the first step in truly letting go. I put on my coat and stepped outside into the cool air. The garden was quiet now, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness wash over me. The world was moving on, and so was I. I knew this was not the end of my story with Michael. It was just a new chapter, one where I was no longer waiting for him to change. I was no longer waiting for him to see me. I was seeing myself now. The house felt different now, quieter somehow. It was no longer just a place where memories lived, but a space that reflected my own solitude. I had spent so much of my life surrounded by family, by noise, by laughter, by the constant hum of daily life. But now, I was alone. And for the first time in years, that did not feel like a bad thing. I sat on the couch, my hands resting in my lap, and thought about what it meant to be alone. At first, the idea had terrified me. I had always feared being alone. For years, I had filled every moment with other people, with tasks, with distractions. But now, alone did not seem so lonely. It was a quiet kind of peace, the kind I had never really known before. I spent my days doing simple things that had always been there, but that I had never really appreciated. I read books that had been gathering dust on my shelves, each page turning slowly as I savored the words. I sat in the garden, the one I had carefully tended to for years, and listened to the birds sing, the wind rustling through the leaves. I began to cook for myself, just for the joy of it, without anyone else to please but me. There was a small comfort in the silence, It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of space. Space to think, to reflect, to breathe. For the first time in a long time, I could hear myself. I could hear my own thoughts, my own desires, my own needs. I had always thought that being alone meant something was wrong, that it was a sign of failure, of loss, of being forgotten. But now, I was beginning to understand that being alone did not mean I was invisible. It simply meant that I was not defined by anyone else. I was free to be me. I spent a lot of time thinking about my family during this period of solitude. I thought about my children and the way things had changed between us. I thought about Michael, about how we had reached this point. I wondered if there was any way back, any possibility of reconciliation. But I also realized that I could not force anything. I could not make people see me the way I wanted them to. I could not control how they chose to be in my life. And so, I began to accept the reality of being alone, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to rediscover myself, to focus on the things that truly mattered to me, and to stop worrying about whether anyone else understood or approved. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I was simply living. And in that, I found a quiet joy. The woman I had been, the woman I had worked so hard to be for everyone else, was gone now. In her place stood someone new, someone who was still figuring things out, but who felt a growing sense of strength within. I was not the same. I could feel it deep within me, in the way I moved through the world now, in the way I thought about myself and my place in it. At first, it felt like a loss. I had been someone who lived for others, someone who found her purpose in giving and caring. But now I was learning to stand on my own. I was learning to trust myself again, to find purpose in my own choices, in my own desires. I was no longer just a mother, a wife, or a daughter. I was Helen, just Helen, and that felt like the most freeing thing of all. I had spent so much of my life defining myself by my relationships, by my role in other people's lives. But now, I was beginning to see that my value was not tied to anyone else's expectations. My worth was not determined by what I could give or do for others. It was simply inherent in who I was. And that realization was both humbling and empowering. There, change was gradual but undeniable. I began to see the world differently. I saw people differently. And perhaps most importantly, I began to see myself differently. The woman I had been was a reflection of who I thought I should be, who I thought I had to be. But the woman I was becoming, she was more authentic, more whole, more herself. She did not need validation from others. She was learning to validate herself. There were days when I still missed the old ways, when I still longed for the security of familiar roles and routines. But I knew that the growth I had experienced, the strength I had found in myself, was worth the discomfort. It was worth the loneliness that sometimes came with change, because I was no longer afraid of being alone. I was beginning to embrace it. I still had moments of doubt. I still had days when the past crept in, when the pain of lost connections made my heart ache. But I no longer allowed that pain to define me. I no longer allowed it to consume me. I had learned something important over these months of quiet reflection. The pain of loss and change did not last forever, and the strength that came from it Well, that was something that could carry me through anything. I was not the same. But that was not a bad thing. It was a necessary thing. A thing that had given me the freedom to be who I truly was, to find my own voice, and to finally see the worth in being just me. The days felt longer now, stretching out before me like a quiet river. There was still so much uncertainty in my life, still so many unanswered questions. But amid the stillness, something unexpected had begun to happen. A small light had appeared. It was not a blazing fire or an overwhelming wave of change, but a gentle shift, a flicker of hope, quiet and steady. It was the way the morning sun now felt a little warmer against my skin, the way the flowers in my garden seemed to bloom with more vibrant colors than I remembered. It was the soft, reassuring presence of life moving forward. Despite everything, I could feel the shift within me, too. The emotional weight I had carried for so long was slowly lifting. It was not gone, not entirely, but it had less hold on me. I had learned to carry it with more grace, to allow the small joys of life to fill the space it once consumed. I had begun to take walks, just around the block at first. At first it had felt strange to be out in the world alone, but now I welcomed the quiet rhythm of my steps on the pavement. Each step felt like a small victory, a reaffirmation that I was moving forward, no matter how slowly. And then, one day, I met someone. It was completely unexpected. I had no plans to meet anyone, had no intention of seeking out a new connection. But as I walked through the park, a man approached me. He was older than I expected, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He asked if I needed help with the bag I was carrying, but it was not just the offer of help that caught my attention. It was the way he spoke to me. He spoke as if he saw me, truly saw me, in a way that felt different from anyone else. We talked for a while, and I was surprised at how easy it was to converse with him. He spoke of his life, his travels, his family, and somehow it felt like I was listening to someone who truly understood the value of time, of living fully in each moment. For a moment I felt like I had stepped outside of myself, outside of my worries and my past, and into something lighter. His name was Richard, and he had lived in the area for years. He was kind, thoughtful, and seemed to have a warmth that drew people in. It was a small connection, a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things. But it was enough. It reminded me that life, in its quiet way, still offered chances for new beginnings, for small moments of connection, for hope. It reminded me that there was still light in the world, even on the days when it felt like all I saw was darkness. That afternoon, I went home with a heart that felt a little lighter. It was a small thing, a brief conversation with a stranger, but it had brought with it a sense of possibility. The world was not as bleak as it had sometimes seemed. There was still beauty, still kindness, still the potential for change, even in the smallest of moments. It was a small light, but it was enough. The world did not feel like it had shifted overnight, but something inside of me had. It was subtle at first, like a seed planted in the earth, unseen and quiet. But over time, I could feel it pushing through the soil, reaching toward the sunlight. Began again. It was not a grand beginning. There were no fanfare or celebrations, no sudden, dramatic moments of transformation, but there was a sense of renewal in the smallest of changes. I began to take better care of myself. I started by getting up earlier, taking a few moments to breathe before the day started, before the world began demanding things from me. I paid attention to my body, stretching, walking, eating with more mindfulness. For the first time in years, I thought about my own needs, and I did not feel guilty for doing so. I had always been the person who took care of others. It was part of who I was, part of what made me feel valuable. But in the process, I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had spent so many years giving away my energy, my time, my love, that there was little left for me. Now I was learning to fill my own cup first. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that allowed me to be a better version of myself for the people I loved. And perhaps most importantly, I was learning to be kind to myself. I started going to a yoga class a few times a week. At first it was hard. My body ached in places I had forgotten existed, and I struggled to keep up with the movements. But with each class, I felt myself grow stronger. It was not just my body that was becoming more flexible. It was my mind as well. I was learning to let go of the need for perfection, learning to accept myself just as I was. I also spent more time in nature, walking through the park, sitting by the river, listening to the sounds of the world around me. Nature had always been a place of solace for me, but now it was more than just a peaceful retreat. It was a reminder that I too was a part of something larger than myself, something that was constantly changing, growing, and evolving, and I began to write again. It had been years since I had written for myself. Writing had once been a passion of mine, something that helped me express the emotions I could not say aloud. But life had gotten in the way, and I had stopped making time for it. Now, I sat down at my desk each morning and wrote whatever came to mind. It was not always coherent, not always perfect, but it was mine. It was an outlet for all the things I had bottled up inside for so long. And with each word, I felt more and more like the woman I had once been, the woman I was meant to be. Starting over did not mean forgetting my past. It did not mean pretending that the pain, the losses, the betrayals did not matter. They had shaped me, just as much as the moments of joy and connection had. But beginning again meant finding the strength to keep moving forward, to keep living, even when it felt difficult. It meant recognizing that the end of one chapter was not the end of my story. And slowly, with each new day, I began to believe that the best parts of my life were still ahead of me. It was a quiet morning when I first heard from him. The message appeared in my inbox, just a few words. "Helen, can we talk?" It was Michael. For a moment I sat still, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do. The name on the screen brought back so many memories, some painful, some joyful, but all deeply intertwined with the past. I had not heard from him in months. After everything that had happened, the misunderstandings, the accusations, the cold silence between us, it had seemed like there was no way back. I had thought we were done, that the emotional distance between us was too great to cross, and yet here he was, reaching out. I felt a flood of emotions rise within me. There was anger, yes. There was hurt, too, sharp and raw, as though the wounds had never fully healed. But there was also something else, something that made my heart ache even more than the anger. It was the remnants of the love I had once had for him, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he was reaching out because he had changed. But could I trust that? Could I trust him? I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the thoughts settle. I had worked so hard to get to this place. this peaceful place where I could finally breathe without feeling suffocated by the past. I had made peace with my solitude, with the idea that I was enough on my own. I had begun to enjoy the quiet, the simplicity of life without the weight of other people's expectations. And now, Michael wanted to come back into that life. I thought about our years together, the way we had once been partners in everything. There was a time when I believed that nothing could tear us apart, that we would always find our way back to each other, no matter the distance. But life had a way of changing things, of testing even the strongest of bonds. I thought about the hurtful words he had said to me, the way he had dismissed my feelings, my experiences. He had never fully understood me, and perhaps that was where the trouble had started. He had expected me to be one thing, a mother, a wife, someone who was always there. And when I began to change, to find myself again, it seemed to push him away. Maybe he had always seen me as something static, something unchanging. But I was not that woman anymore. I was different now. I had learned to stand on my own, to live without the constant validation of others. The question remained, do I allow him back in? I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on me. I had come so far, and yet there was still a part of me that wondered if there was a chance for reconciliation, for healing. Could we rebuild what had been broken? I decided to respond. I am willing to talk, Michael, but not for the sake of the past, only if we are willing to be honest with each other, with ourselves. As I hit send, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. I did not know what would come of this conversation, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer afraid of the outcome. I had learned that it was okay to be uncertain, to not have all the answers. I had learned that whatever happened, I would be okay. The day Michael and I met to talk felt like any other, and yet it was different. The air seemed thicker, filled with unspoken words, with emotions that neither of us dared to name. We chose a quiet cafe by the river, a neutral place where the sound of the flowing water could soften the tension between us. When he arrived, I almost did not recognize him. It had only been a few months, but in that time, so much had changed. Not just in me, but in him too. His eyes, once filled with certainty and confidence, seemed more uncertain, more vulnerable. He had always been the one who stood tall, who had all the answers, who knew how to fix everything. But now, he looked human, just like the rest of us. It was strange, almost unsettling, to see him so different, so much like me in my moments of uncertainty. "Helen," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. I could hear the regret in his tone, the remorse that had lingered in his words, even before he spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak at first. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words felt stuck, trapped in my throat. So much had happened between us, so much pain and silence, that I did not know where to begin. "I've thought a lot about us," Michael continued, his eyes meeting mine. "I know I hurt you, and I know I was wrong. I never truly understood how much I was pushing you away, how much I was taking you for granted." His voice trembled slightly, and for the first time in a long while, I saw vulnerability in him. I took a deep breath, my heart heavy with the emotions I had carried for so long. It was hard to look at him now, to listen to his words because the pain I had endured was still so fresh. But I had come here not just to hear his apology, but to understand something for myself. Had I truly healed? Was I ready to face him, knowing what I now knew about myself? "I appreciate your honesty," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I really do. But Michael, I have changed. I am not the same woman you once knew, and I cannot go back to being that woman." I paused, looking at him carefully. His face was etched with concern, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to find the woman he had once loved. But that woman was gone, and the one sitting before him was someone new, someone who had learned to live without the constant approval of others. Someone who had learned that she was enough, even without anyone else's validation. I have spent so much of my life giving, without thinking about myself, without considering what I truly wanted. I continued, my words gaining strength. But now, I am learning to take care of me, to live for me. I cannot be the woman I once was, the woman who always put others first. I could see the pain on his face, the regret. But I could also see something else, something that made me feel a strange sense of peace. It was the recognition that we were no longer the people we had been when we first met, and perhaps that was the hardest truth of all. "You do not need to apologize," I said, my voice softening. "You have already apologized in your actions, in the way you've reached out. But I cannot promise you anything more than what I can give right now." Michael nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen before. He had always been the strong one, the one who never showed his vulnerability. But now, in this moment, I realized that we were both vulnerable, both human. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what will happen between us, Helen, but I just want you to know I never stopped caring, not really." I felt the weight of those words settle in my chest. I had heard them before, and yet, this time, they felt different. They felt like a truth that had been hidden beneath layers of misunderstandings and unspoken pain. But it was too late, I realized. I could not go back to the life I had lived before, to the relationship that had defined so much of who I had been, and that was okay. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with the decision. I could not allow myself to be pulled back into a life that no longer fit me. I was different now. I had changed, and so had he. But the woman I was becoming could no longer be defined by the past. "I think we both need to let go," I said, my voice steady. "It is time for us to move on, to find new paths, even if they are separate." The silence between us felt long, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of acceptance, of understanding that we had come to the end of one chapter and that it was time to write a new one. I stood up, my heart full, my mind clear. "I wish you all the best, Michael. Truly." And with that, I walked away, feeling stronger than I had in years. There was something deeply liberating about the decision I had made that day. As I walked away from Michael, I felt a lightness I had not known in years. It was not that I was free from pain. No, the scars of the past would always be with me. But I was free from the expectation that I should live for someone else's happiness. For so long, I had been defined by the needs and wants of others, my family, my friends, my husband. But in that moment, I realized that the only person I truly needed to please was myself. Choosing myself was not an easy decision. It meant letting go of the comfort of familiar relationships, even those that had once felt like home. It meant confronting the fact that for years I had neglected my own desires in favor of everyone else's. But in the end, it was the most empowering choice I could have made. I began to understand that I had spent so many years seeking approval, trying to be the person everyone else expected me to be, that I had lost sight of who I was, the person who loved to write, who found peace in nature, who longed to travel and explore the world, the person who needed quiet moments of reflection, who wanted to connect with others on a deeper level, and who deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. It was not that I had abandoned my family or my responsibilities. I had not turned my back on them. But I had come to realize that my worth did not depend on their approval. I could still love them, still care for them, but I no longer needed to sacrifice my happiness for theirs. Choosing myself meant setting boundaries. It meant saying no when I needed to, even if it disappointed others. It meant taking the time to do things that brought me joy, even if they seemed selfish or unnecessary to those around me. It meant finding the strength to say goodbye to relationships that no longer served me, even if they were familiar and comforting. It was not a sudden change. It was gradual. A slow process of peeling away the layers of self-doubt and fear that had built up over the years. And every time I made a decision that was for me, every time I put myself first, I felt stronger. I felt more like the woman I had always been deep inside, the woman I had lost touch with for so long. One of the first things I did for myself was to take a trip, a small one, but one that had been on my mind for years. I had always dreamed of visiting the coast, of sitting by the ocean, listening to the waves and feeling the salt air on my skin. For years, I had put that dream aside, telling myself there would be time for it later. But now I realized that later might never come unless I made it happen. So I booked a small cabin by the sea, packed a bag, and left without a second thought. It was one of the most peaceful weeks of my life. I woke up early each morning to watch the sunrise, walked along the shore, and spent hours reading and writing in a small journal I'd brought with me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, not in anyone else's life, but in my own. I had learned to choose myself, and with that choice came a new understanding of who I was. It was as if I had been living in a shadow for so long, and now for the first time I was stepping into the light, and I liked what I saw. It had been several months since I chose myself, and I could feel the change in my bones. There was a lightness to my every step, a quiet confidence that had not existed before. Every morning now felt like a new opportunity, a fresh start, and I welcomed it. I had stopped waiting for life to give me permission to live. Instead, I had begun to take what I needed for myself, not in a selfish way, but in a way that honored my own needs and desires. I no longer rushed through my days, overwhelmed by responsibilities and obligations. Instead, I allowed myself the space to breathe, to exist fully, to experience life without the constant weight of expectation. I started to take long walks in the park, something I had always loved but had never made time for. I started reading again, not for work or for anyone else, but because it brought me joy. I even began to try my hand at painting, something I had always been curious about, but had never dared to pursue. There were no longer any voices in my head telling me I was being irresponsible or selfish. There was no longer the fear that if I took time for myself, something or someone would fall apart. I had learned that the world would not end if I put myself first. And in fact, it had only made everything clearer. I began to reconnect with old friends, the ones I had lost touch with over the years. I found joy in these relationships, not because they completed me, but because they were now part of a fuller, more vibrant version of myself. I could talk to them without worrying about what they thought of me or how I was perceived. We laughed, we shared, and I realized how much I had missed true connection, not the kind that was based on need or obligation, but the kind that was rooted in mutual respect and care. One day, I was sitting in my living room, sipping tea, and watching the sunlight filter through the curtains when it hit me. I was truly content, not in a fleeting, temporary way, but in a way that felt deep and lasting. I was not perfect. None of us are. But I had found a peace within myself that I had never thought possible. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you are enough, just as you are. I thought back to the days when I felt lost, when I did not know who I was or where I was going. It seemed so distant now, like a life I had left behind, one that no longer held any power over me, and in its place was a new day, every day, a new beginning, a chance to create the life I wanted, not the one others had shaped for me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free to love, free to be, free to make mistakes, free to grow. It was a kind of freedom I had never imagined. And it came not from the world around me, but from within. I had learned that true freedom lies not in external circumstances, but in the choices we make every day, the choices to honor ourselves, to live with integrity, and to embrace who we are. As I sat there, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, I realized something even more profound. I no longer needed anyone else's approval. Not from Michael, not from my children, not from anyone. I was enough, just as I was, and that I realized was the most powerful feeling of all. It is strange how life works sometimes. I spent so many years waiting for the approval of others, for their acceptance, for their recognition. But when I finally found peace within myself, I realized that I no longer needed to wait for anyone's permission to live my life. And yet, there was one thing I had never really done. I had never taken the time to say thank you to those who had played a part in my journey, both the good and the bad. It was something I had never fully understood until now. The people who had hurt me, the ones who had made me feel invisible, had also been the ones to push me toward growth. In their absence, I found strength. In their mistakes, I found my lessons. In the moments of pain, I found healing. I think back to my family, the ones who had ignored me, the ones who had left me behind. For so long I had carried their rejection, as a burden weighed down by the belief that I was not enough. But now, I saw it differently. Their actions had taught me how to stand on my own, how to find my own worth without needing their validation. They had unknowingly pushed me to the place where I could finally choose myself. And that is why, in this moment, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, writing a letter. A letter to each one of them, not to ask for anything, not to demand anything, but simply to say thank you. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the pain that had ultimately led me to this place of understanding. Thank you for making me see that I was capable of living my life on my own terms. It felt strange at first, this act of gratitude toward people who had hurt me. But as I wrote, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It was not about excusing their behavior or pretending that everything had been okay. It was about releasing the hold they still had on me. I no longer needed to carry their mistakes or their indifference. I could let it go, and in letting it go, I could finally say thank you. I also thought about Michael. Even though we had parted ways, there was a part of me that had been angry for so long. Angry at the way he had treated me, at the way he had dismissed me, at the way he had taken me for granted. But as I reflected on our time together, I realized that there was much I had learned from him as well. He had helped me see how I had lost myself in the pursuit of others' happiness. He had shown me the importance of setting boundaries and of living for myself. And for that, I owed him a debt of gratitude too. As I wrote my letters, I found myself feeling lighter, more at peace. I realized that gratitude does not mean forgetting the hurt or pretending that everything was perfect. It simply means acknowledging the role others have played in our growth, in our journey. It means recognizing that every person we encounter, no matter how brief their presence in our lives, leaves us with something, sometimes pain, sometimes joy, but always a lesson. When I finished writing, I placed the letters in envelopes, sealed them, and put them away. I did not know if I would ever send them, and that was okay. The act of writing them was enough. It was my way of releasing the past, of letting go of the resentment that had kept me stuck for so long. The next morning, I woke up early, just as the sun was rising, and I stepped outside to watch the sky turn from dark to light. The world seemed so quiet, so still, and yet it felt full of possibilities. It felt like a new beginning. I took a deep breath and whispered to the wind, "Thank you." Not just to the people who had hurt me, but to everyone who had helped me along the way, those who had supported me, those who had loved me, and even those who had left me. I had come to realize that every person, every experience, had been a part of the story of my life, and for that, I was grateful. As I stood there, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on my face, I knew that my journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to choose myself, to love myself, and to be grateful for the life I had built. And that was enough. It is a strange thing, forgiveness. We often think of it as something we give to others, a gift we offer to those who have wronged us. But over the years, I have come to realize that the most important forgiveness is the one we give to ourselves. I had spent so much of my life focused on the mistakes I had made, the decisions I had regretted, the times I had let myself down. I had carried that guilt with me like a heavy weight, believing that I was not deserving of peace, not deserving of happiness. But now, standing at this place of reflection, I knew that I had to forgive myself. It was not about excusing the things I had done or pretending that I had never made mistakes. It was about accepting those mistakes, understanding them, and letting go of the shame that had kept me trapped for so long. I had done the best I could, with the knowledge I had at the time. I had acted from a place of love, of fear, of uncertainty, but I had never intentionally hurt anyone, least of all myself. Forgiveness, I realized, is not about erasing the past. It is about making peace with it. It is about acknowledging that we are all flawed, all human, all doing the best we can. We make mistakes. We fall. We fail. But we also rise. We grow. We learn. For years, I had blamed myself for things that were out of my control. I had blamed myself for the failed marriage, for the strained relationships with my children, for the times I had given up on my dreams in favor of others. I had carried all of that weight, believing that it was my fault, that I was somehow not enough. But now, I saw things differently. I was not perfect, but I was worthy of love, worthy of compassion, worthy of forgiveness. I sat quietly one afternoon, reflecting on my past, and I allowed myself to feel the pain, not to dwell on it, not to wallow in it, but to acknowledge it, to give myself permission to feel what I had been avoiding for so long. And as I sat there, I whispered to myself, "I forgive you." It was a quiet, simple phrase, but it held so much power. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be human. I allowed myself to let go of the guilt, the regret, and the self-blame that had weighed me down for years. Forgiveness was not a one-time thing. It was a process, something I would have to remind myself of every day. But I was learning to be kind to myself. I was learning to offer myself the same compassion that I had always given to others. The road to self-forgiveness was not easy, and it still is not. There are days when the old voices of self-doubt and shame creep back in, reminding me of all the ways I have fallen short. But now, when those voices speak, I am learning to silence them with love. I am learning to say, "I did my best, and that is enough." I no longer need to carry the weight of past mistakes. I no longer need to punish myself for things I cannot change. I am allowed to be imperfect. I am allowed to make mistakes. And most importantly, I am allowed to forgive myself. In that forgiveness, I found freedom. In that freedom, I found peace. Freedom. It is a word we hear often, but it is something we do not always understand fully. We think of it as the ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want, without consequence. But I have learned that true freedom is not about living without rules or limits. True freedom is about releasing the chains that bind us, chains of fear, of regret, of self-doubt, and of the expectations others place upon us. It is about shedding the weight of the past and stepping into a life that is fully our own. I remember the day I realized I was free. It was not some grand moment or dramatic event. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it changed everything. I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, the sun warm on my face, and for the first time in so long, I felt light. I did not feel burdened by the mistakes of the past or the weight of my family's expectations. I did not feel the pressure to be someone I was not. In that moment, I knew I was free. Freedom came when I stopped asking for permission to live my life. It came when I stopped waiting for someone else to make me feel worthy, when I stopped needing the approval of others to feel complete. It came when I stopped believing that my worth was tied to what I could do for others or how others saw me. I realized that I could choose to live for myself, without guilt, without apology, and that was enough. There was a time when I thought freedom meant running away from everything, the responsibilities, the expectations, the relationships that held me back. But now, I see that true freedom is not about escape. It is about embracing who we are, where we are, and choosing to live authentically. It is about walking through life with the understanding that we are enough, just as we are. I had spent so much of my life feeling trapped by my own fears, trapped by the expectations others had for me, trapped by my own need to please. But now, I was no longer trapped. I was free to be me. And that was the most empowering feeling in the world. I did not need to run away from anything. I had everything I needed inside of me. The strength, the wisdom, the love. I already had it. I just had to stop looking outside of myself for it. Freedom was not about being fearless. It was about facing the fears head on and realizing that they no longer had power over me. It was about standing tall in my truth, no matter who agreed with me or who disagreed. It was about knowing that I could create my own happiness, my own peace, and my own future. As I walked through my days, I felt that freedom in everything I did, in the way I moved, in the way I spoke, in the way I loved. It was a freedom that was not dependent on anything outside of me. It was a freedom that came from within. I thought about the years I had spent holding myself back, the years I had spent waiting for someone else to give me permission to live. And I realized that those years were behind me now. I was free to live my life on my own terms, free to make mistakes, free to grow, and free to love without fear. As I stood outside one evening, watching the sun set and the stars begin to appear, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey I had taken, for the lessons I had learned, and for the person I had become. I was no longer the woman who sought validation from others. I was no longer the woman who believed her worth depended on how others saw her. I was no longer the woman who lived in fear of making mistakes. I was free. Free to be myself. Free to choose my path. Free to live my life without apology. And that freedom, I realized, was everything. There is a certain peace that comes when we finally understand ourselves. It is a peace that cannot be found in the approval of others or in the pursuit of success. It is a peace that comes from deep within, from accepting who we are, flaws and all, and standing proudly in our own truth. For so many years, I had searched for my identity in the roles I played for others: the mother, the wife, the daughter. But I had forgotten the most important role, the role of being myself. I spent so many years believing that I was defined by what others saw in me. If they saw me as successful, then I felt successful. If they saw me as a good mother or a good wife, then I believed I was those things. But when I looked in the mirror, I did not always recognize the woman staring back. She was lost in the expectations of others, in the endless desire to please, in the constant need for validation. But now, I see things differently. I have learned that who I am is not determined by anyone else's perception of me. I am not defined by my family's expectations, by society's standards, or by the roles I play. I am defined by my own heart, my own choices, and the lessons I have learned along the way. It has taken me years to understand this, years of struggle, of self-doubt, of pain. But now, I know who I am. I am not perfect, and I do not need to be. I am strong, I am resilient, and I am worthy of love, respect, and peace. I am a woman who has lived through heartache and come out stronger on the other side. I am a woman who has made mistakes and learned from them. I am a woman who has loved deeply and been loved in return. And in that understanding, I have found my power. I no longer need to seek approval from others, for I know who I am. I no longer need to change myself to fit anyone's mold, for I am already enough. I no longer need to prove my worth, for I know that I am valuable simply because I exist. I think back to the days when I struggled with self-doubt, when I felt invisible, when I thought that my life had no meaning outside of what others needed from me. I realize now that I was looking in the wrong places. The meaning of my life has always been within me. It has always been in the choices I make, the love I give, and the person I am becoming. As I stand here, at this moment in my life, I no longer feel like I am searching for something. I am not searching for validation, for acceptance, or for approval. I am simply living, simply being, and I am at peace with that. I know who I am, and that knowledge is the greatest gift I could ever give myself. It is the gift of self-acceptance, of self-love, and of knowing that I am enough, just as I am. And with that knowledge, I am ready to face whatever comes next. For I know that no matter what challenges lie ahead, I will meet them with strength, with courage, and with the deep understanding that I am worthy of every good thing life has to offer. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that has led me to this moment, I want to share something important with you. This story has been my journey, but it is not just my journey. It is a journey that many of us walk, though the paths we take may look different. We all face challenges, we all experience loss, and we all struggle with moments of doubt and confusion. But no matter what you may be going through, I want you to know that you are not alone. I have learned so much in the years I have lived, but one of the most powerful lessons is this: you are enough. You do not need to change who you are to meet someone else's expectations. You do not need to prove your worth to anyone. You are worthy simply because you exist, and you are deserving of love, respect, and happiness. There will be times when you feel lost, when you feel invisible, when you feel like nothing is going the way you hoped. But I want you to remember that those feelings do not define you. They are moments, and they will pass. You are stronger than you think. You have the power to rise, to heal, and to find joy again. I spent so many years trying to please everyone else, trying to live up to ideals that were not mine to begin with. I thought that my worth was tied to what I could give, to how others saw me, to what they expected from me. But now I know the truth. My worth was never about those things. It was about who I am inside, and so is yours. I want you to believe in your own strength. I want you to trust that you have the courage to face whatever comes your way. I want you to remember that even in your darkest moments, you have the power to choose how you respond. You have the ability to choose your path, to choose your peace, to choose your joy. You are not defined by your mistakes, your past, or your fears. You are defined by your heart, your resilience, and your capacity to love and forgive, both others and yourself. And once you understand that, once you truly believe it, you will find that your life will begin to shift. You will begin to walk with your head held high, knowing that you are worthy of everything good in this world. So I say to you now, embrace who you are, be kind to yourself, forgive yourself, and know that you are enough just as you are. I have walked my path, and I am here now in this place of peace and understanding. And as I share my story with you, I hope that you will find your own peace, your own strength, and your own path toward healing. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for listening, for understanding, and for allowing me to share my heart with you. I hope that in some small way, my story has touched you and reminded you that you too have the power to rise, to heal, and to embrace the life that is waiting for you. Because you are enough. You always have been.